Thank you, Massi, and welcome to the second session of Foundation Forum 2022. In this session, we will look at the future of work, and as Massi has already indicated, we will establish whether it's dark clouds or silver linings that will prevail. In 60 minutes, and that's all we have for that session, it is obviously impossible to look at all aspects of the future of work, and that's why we have chosen a focus: remote work. We will examine what we have learned from the massive increase in telework during the pandemic and what we can expect from hybrid work models that are very likely to be an important part of the future of work. To do this, we have invited 5 speakers to join us in this session. Let me introduce them. Anna Kopp joins us from Munich, Germany. She's Director IT at Microsoft. Camilla Cavendish joins us from London. Hello, Camilla. Camilla is a contributing editor and columnist of the Financial Times. Albert Kruft joins us from Germany. Albert is the advisor of the Central Works Council of Solvay Germany and the secretary of Solvay's European Works Council. Kalien Schrele is the director of the European Institute for Gender Equality, EIGE. She joins us from Vilnius in Lithuania. And last but not least, André Sobczak. He is the deputy mayor of Nantes, and he joins us from his city in the west of France. Welcome to you all, and thank you so much for joining and being part of Foundation Forum 2022. We will hear from all of them after this short introductory video that will help to set the scene for this session.
Since 1990, Eurofound's European Working Conditions Survey has analysed the working conditions of EU employees and the self-employed. In 2021, the COVID-19 pandemic meant face-to-face interviews were not possible. Over 58,000 workers in the 27 EU member states were contacted by telephone to understand the kind of working conditions they were facing during the pandemic. The 2021 findings are preliminary, but confirm that, while around 1/3 of employees, 35%, continued to work from their employer's premises, 12% worked exclusively from home, at least some of the time during the pandemic, and that women were more likely to work from home than men. Unsurprisingly, working from home was more prevalent in some sectors. While most workers in commerce, industry and healthcare still went to work, those in financial or other services were most likely to work from home. Managers and professionals, but also clerical support workers, experienced the highest share of remote work. 22% of managers in financial services and 30% of professionals in other services worked from home all the time during the pandemic. How did people find working from home? Many workers highlighted positive aspects like better work-life balance. For those with children at home, almost 40% felt their working hours fit in very well with family or other commitments outside of work. At the same time, higher levels of autonomy when working from home brought challenges. 25% of those working from home reported working during their free time daily or several times a week, and remote workers were more likely to work long hours. Higher levels of physical and emotional exhaustion were reported by those who continued to work from the employer's premises. But levels of anxiety were higher among those working from home, with 37% suffering from anxiety over the past 12 months versus 30% not working at home. These preliminary results point to many advantages of remote working, such as greater autonomy and a better work-life balance. But risks are emerging too, with longer and more irregular hours, the loss of social connections, and a blurring of boundaries between work and life. What is clear is that if remote work is here to stay, it will be critical for policymakers to consider the benefits, but also address any risks.
So, here we are, Anna, a mixed bag, the experience of remote working during the pandemic, according to those workers that participated in the European Working Conditions Telephone Survey in 2021. In your company, in Microsoft, has the pandemic reinforced or changed attitudes towards remote working among employees, but also among management?
Thank you. Yes, reinforced, to be very honest. We started working like this already 2012. So for us, it was quite natural when the pandemic came, and we just kept working. Only we did home office every day of the week and not just maybe one or two, the way we used to do it. And at the time, a lot of customers came to us and said, how do you do this? They wanted to talk to us, not about our products or anything, but how do you work? What's the culture? And how did you manage to just switch over like that? And we were pretty used to it. Now, of course, a lot has changed over the time anyway, to be honest. And the full week has also shown that there are some gaps in it, but overall, we were quite happy to continue. And of course, a lot of people were happy that they could continue doing their job and reaching their targets and working. I think the key thing that many also saw was the ability to at least be able to stay home with the family and do your job while we had homeschooling, etc. So there's a lot to unpack there in your question for sure. But yes, we were already used to it. And what we're doing right now is even looking at what is going to come after. What's the work world going to be once the pandemic over, and where are we going to go, and where's technology going, and what are the trends specifically on the culture side, and where do I start as a company moving into this future of modern work?
Anna, productivity, what happened? Were workers now exclusively working from home as productive as they were when they worked from the office, or in a more reduced part of teleworking? And I would like to know whether there are certain conditions that need to be fulfilled in order to prevent that working from home will lead to a dip in productivity.
We were overproductive. To be honest, because when you don't have those little breaks like commuting or meeting or going for a coffee or meeting people for small meetings and walking around the office, you tend to stay a lot at your PC. So we saw that productivity in the beginning went up a lot. Interestingly, innovation might just have dipped a little bit because we are collaborating and interacting with each other. Calendars are really full, so we're producing a lot, but these just brainstorming and getting ideas just with quick conversations with colleagues is not happening. So this is one of the conscious efforts that we have to put in place to see how we can get people to talk on that basis rather than in strict calendar topic-oriented, agenda-driven slots that we have throughout the whole day. And of course, at some point, when it comes to productivity with a really full week, is that as much as we want to produce and be efficient, there's only so much that you can do with your energy. So you have to conserve the energy and prioritize really well. And moving into the future, we think that we need to balance that out a bit. So one of the things that we have started doing is we never have any 1 hour meetings and never half hour. It's always 25 or 50, just to make sure we balance out that people get to stand up and do other things or walk around a little bit, and making sure people take their breaks as well, because productivity was not the problem at all.
Thank you for that. I will remember and take home with me the recommendation for very short 20 to 25 minute meetings there. Camilla, I want to bring you in on this issue of productivity because in a recent article that you wrote titled "It's Time to Admit That Hybrid is Not Working," you present some doubts that working from home is really as productive and good for productivity as Anna has just described it.
Yes, so I think what we saw in 2020 was what Anna's described, which is actually many people worked longer hours. And certainly people were reporting that they were more productive. It's possible since then to get a slightly more nuanced picture, to be honest, because a lot of the initial studies were based on looking at when we were logging on and off of our computers, which actually didn't necessarily reflect how many hours we were doing. It also didn't reflect the number of meetings we were having. So I'm delighted to hear from Anna that the right target is 25 minutes. There was a very interesting study in Japan, which has found that actually productivity has fallen substantially in Japan from home working. There was another very interesting study of 10,000 professionals in a big tech firm, which found that although people were working harder, output was falling. And one of the reasons was because a lot of us are having more meetings in order to try and coordinate and schedule. And I think one of the things that has become at risk in a way is the element of trust. Back in 2020, I don't know where you were all working, but I was doing various different jobs, one of which was entirely on Zoom, but largely with people I already knew. And I think most of us were working with people that we knew, we built up trust, we shared the organizational culture and values. Going forward, especially with the Great Resignation, we're seeing a lot of churn, a lot of new people coming on. And one of the questions is, how are we going to build that kind of trust again with those people? Because if we don't, we may be spending even more time with internal emails and meetings trying to schedule and check on people, which is really not the right way to go forward.
So Camilla, what you're saying is that it really depends a little bit of which group of worker you are. Is it an established employee in a company that is now working remotely most of the time or very often, or is it a newcomer to the company? Would you agree that there is a difference?
Yes, I think that's one of the differences. I mean, most CEOs I speak to are all worried about the very new, most junior people. I mean, all the kids who are graduating into the labour force really do need that kind of role modelling. They need that contact with senior people. I personally think that leadership in any organisation now has to be about being very present in the workplace. I think the irony is that some of the most senior executives have the nicest homes and the nicest home offices, and some of them have been really quite reluctant to come back in, but they're probably almost going to need to be more present. And one of the other reasons for that is that as a leader, it's quite hard to take the temperature of your organization if you're just in formal meetings. And I think we've all found, I mean, to Anna's point about innovation, Zoom is wonderful, but it destroys serendipity. And a lot of us have felt we're only seeing the people who are in our immediate team. Now, that means that you don't have those lateral conversations. For leaders, it means they can't just have that informal chat in the corridor. I mean, my first job was at McKinsey, and I remember that one of the senior partners used to pop into my office probably once a month and just have a chat. And I now realize that what he was doing was walking the corridors and finding out what was going on in a very informal way. Now, if I have people working for me and I was to schedule a formal meeting with them, they would panic. So I think we need to retain a bit of that serendipity.
Very interesting. I think that's absolutely correct to imagine that, of course, if you pass a person in the corridor, you get a feeling of how well he or she is, and if that is no longer possible, if all the interaction is on screen, much more difficult to gauge the level of well-being of employees in the company. Let's go to a touchy subject, or maybe touchy subject, Anna, monitoring of employee performance in a remote working situation, surveillance, etc. What was your experience there, and what do you think the risks for the future are?
I want to build on what Camilla just said, trust, how important trust is in this new world. And we're moving into, it's going to be a future where the ideal manager and the ideal candidate are different from what we might have expected 20, 30 years ago, where we wanted people to be punctual and you wanted to monitor what it is they were doing. We can probably not do that in that extent, and it's also not meant to. Now, there's two things here, and one is, when you have and establish that trust, are you monitoring performance or are you monitoring behavior? And those need to be separated. We as a company, we have a works council that we partner really closely with, and they were instrumental for our success over the last 2 years for us to be able to drive the workplace forward. And making sure that our employees also had the mental health and resilience that they needed. And one of the things you're not allowed to do in Germany without co-determination from the Works Council is behavior tracking. And the way we track or measure performance, of course, for a salesperson is quite easy because he needs to hit his number. They got the quotas and it's pipeline and forecast, and you do your number, you sell, and then you have that total number. Obviously, that's one of the easy ones that you are allowed to track because the bonus system is tied to that. But for example, if you do have trust, and I see an employee that after half the year is tracking way above 50% of their targets, I do not care if they're punctual. I don't need to track their behavior because I trust that they want to do a good job and they want to hit their target for the year. So that also, if you're peeling back the onion and this trust, how do you build that? And I think many managers were maybe not trained for the last 30 years to work in this kind of way. So what we did was taking our managers, the middle management, by the hand, explaining what you're allowed to do, what you're allowed to track, and what you should coach on. Because it's not just about asking questions, how are you doing this, or this, but saying, how's it going with your customer? How's it going with that launch? Do you need my help? What's the status? What are the blockers? So moving from controlling to coaching is really important. And then if you get that trust established, you will not feel the need to track behavior like being punctual or are they sitting at their desk all day, because the performance is there, the quality, the impact, and the outcome.
Thanks very much for sharing that, Anna. I want to keep in this area of how well are managers prepared for this, because both of you have mentioned the difficulties of, I would call it, of keeping it all together. So the risk of a disconnect from the company or the organization you're working for, the diminishing loyalty, the loss of social capital in companies because of this disconnect. Are companies ready to tackle this? Are we prepared enough? Camilla, will you start? And then I'll give the floor to Anna before we bring in our other experts.
So I'm really interested, Anna, that you started in 2012. So I think Microsoft has had a long run up to this, and I think that's very different to many other organizations. The piece that I wrote in the FT, which Barbara referred to, had more hits than any other piece we've published for a year, with very polarized response. And there was a huge difference between a lot of CEOs who said to me, thank God someone's raising the issue that it's not actually that easy, because they're really concerned about the social glue, the culture. But on the other hand, they're facing this great resignation where they're desperate to keep people by offering more flexibility. There was a huge difference between that and quite often more junior people in the company. I told a story in that article, which is a true story. A friend of mine who's a very senior person tried to schedule a meeting with one of their employees on a Thursday morning, and the guy said, I'm sorry, it clashes with my yoga session. Now, to me and to many CEOs, that was not really an acceptable response. But to a lot of the FT readers who wrote to me, a lot of the junior ones, it was absolutely the right response. And I had people saying, of course, he should put his well-being ahead of his boss. So I think there's something really, really interesting going on here. But I think some people are saying, is it possible that the Great Resignation is being driven not just by a desire for flexibility, but actually by something else, which is we've forgotten what we liked about our jobs? Because we've all been sitting in these boxes, a lot of us disconnected in the way that you mentioned, Barbara. And actually, if we don't get some of that glue back again and some of those interactions back again, companies are going to be at a competitive disadvantage. So I think that's quite a big question that different sectors will have different answers to.
Thanks. Anna, your reaction to this?
what Camilla just said is just so fascinating because you are so right there. It is a balance, and it depends on if you're a blue collar or white collar worker and the mix of your company. I would be that person doing the yoga, to be honest, next to them. And one of those points is a side note, but it's important for leaders to be humans and be role models, and also take some time and, hey, I'm picking up my kids, or I'm off to sports, I'm leaving earlier today, doing those things. I do that regularly, pretty much daily, because it's important to show that we are trying to balance things. And the pandemic was a very special time where we couldn't go into the office at all. What we tried to do was the serendipity, I think, is it's a very beautiful word. We tried to create those, technology can do a lot of fun things. I'll give you one example of what we did. We used our Teams environment, and there's once per week, there is a dating call, an espresso with someone you don't know. You call into this, and then we break up people in breakout sessions, and you just, get a blind date with someone. Just to see, who is, I've seen you around, or I haven't seen you for ages, or ex-colleagues. You keep kind of bumping into people in these calls. So there are solutions, but I feel they don't replace the real interaction. It has to be that, smelling each other and real bumping in. But it's an effort. And hopefully after the pandemic, we can go back to the way it was before. And I want to give you a statistic here, because at Microsoft before, we could work pretty much from home all the time if we wanted to. The number is 60% office attendance. So even if you had the full freedom, people still came in 3 days a week and worked from home 2 days a week. You don't go to work, you can really get some stuff done, but that was the choice of our employees. So we have that number very clearly, 3 to 2. And at the time, we had anchored in the language, you are in the office and you're telling people, I'll be working from home on Friday. Maybe for many companies, this will turn around. You're working from home 3 days and you tell the others, hey, I'll be in the office on Thursday. Anyone there for a coffee? So we will see how that pans out. But I do think that even if you could just possibly work from home all the time, people will still go to the office because they see a purpose and value, meeting people, technology that they need to do certain things. So I'm very positive on the outlook here. On the actual question there, just to make full circle, many companies might not be there yet because, yes, we did start early. But that's why it's important to me to talk about it, that it really works, and for companies to try out and be more courageous about testing different models. And I also see things like flexible work models, job sharing for mothers, for example, that's just slowly coming. There's a lot of new flexible work models that we could try out to expand the scope of just home office and office.
Thank you so much for these insight and these very concrete examples from the company level. I think that's always very, very useful. I will bring you back in later on, but we are now bringing in our 3 other experts. And I will start with Albert Kruft, because I would like to look at things from the worker's perspective, or in this case, even the perspective of a worker's representative. So your company, Solvay, is a science company in the chemical sector, operating globally. How prepared was Solvay for the challenge of remote work during the pandemic?
Yeah. Hello, Barbara. Thank you to be here. Yeah, Solvay, as you mentioned, is a chemical company. We have our production sites, and it's impossible to work remotely, but we have also admin sites and our headquarters. And I can say we weren't prepared because, we don't use Microsoft, sorry, Anna, but we use Google, and every program has a tool for like Google Meet or Teams. So, but we didn't use it. We had it, but we never used it. So, and then with the pandemic, we start to use Google Meet. And we had a big problem with our VPN. So normally you have to be in the private network of the company, but this network wasn't prepared for so much users. So first we have to fix such problems, and it takes us some weeks, but then it works. But then nobody was prepared to work with Google Meet. It was a real nightmare at the beginning. But then we got also the advice from the governments that we have to send people at home, that they should work from home. But at this time, there was also a shortage of notebooks, so that we could provide notebooks to the people, that they could work from home. And then we had a negotiation, or we challenged the management that people get a package, like a headset or keyboard or a simple mouse, to take it with them at home. And then we had the discussion about the place at home. Many colleagues were at the beginning in the kitchen to work from and this was, we were shocked. And at this time there was no school, no kindergarten. Little child was walking around during the meetings, so it disturbed, and I think especially for women it was a hard time. But after some months, Solvay says, okay, they change from the doubts. Many managers have doubts to work from home, but now they have seen it's possible. And then they say, okay, let's make us an agreement that people can work from home between 1 and 4 days, depending with the conversation from the manager. And we found solution, and we made also agreement. I'm also from Germany. We made an agreement for Germany that people have the right, employees, to work from home between 1 and 4 days. And we negotiated also about a lump sum, that they could buy a chair or a desk. So this was all new things for us, but now it's a normal. And we spend also a lot of travel expense. So a normal meeting have to be face-to-face. And I never forget, we have our first European Plenary Works Council meeting remotely. And also our CEO was in. And one day later, she called me. I couldn't see any emotion of the members. We should do it next time. We should do it face to face. So I think it is a journey. So now we are more fine with these tools, but nevertheless, I, as an employee representative, I need contact. So I can do remotely a meeting if I know this person well. So first you have to build relation, you have to build trust, and then it's easy to do it remotely. Now we have a weekly remote meeting with our select committee of the European Works Council. It's easy. Also with the whole European Works Council, a monthly exchange. But for my colleagues who are sitting in the kitchen, or they don't look at the time frame of the work, so we have to protect themselves, because otherwise they will work night and day. So, and this is for me a difficulty, what we have to find the right balance, or find the right boundaries for them to do it in the right way. So,
Yeah, thank you, Albert. You have mentioned several times we found a solution, we negotiated, we agreed. So social dialogue, obviously, at least in your company, is an important tool to find these solutions. My question is, can we rely entirely on solutions to be found at the company level through social dialogue, through collective negotiations? Or is there also a need for updating or even introducing new legislation? I have, of course, in mind the initiative at EU level, the European Parliament's call for legislation on the right to disconnect. What is your view of that situation? Social dialogue sufficient? Do we also need legislation?
Yeah, we made, before the pandemic came, we signed a global agreement about digitalization. This agreement was like a handbook for the manager how they should deal with digitalization. And it was also that this should also what is in is the right to disconnect. So the work-life balance, ethics, what you mentioned before, it's so mandatory. And also, if you want to implement digital tools, you need the employees. If they don't won't like to work with it, you will fail. So you need a frame, and you need a frame in the company, and I think we need also a frame in Europe. What is possible and what is out of the frame, and otherwise, okay, I can say we have a good exchange with our management, but I don't believe that this happened in every company. So, and okay, we were the first to have such a global agreement. This is a signal that we are on a high level, but I know many other companies and many other colleagues that don't have it. And for them, we need a frame.
Thank you so much, Albert. Very, very clear. Let's move to another very, very important issue, the issue of gender equality. Carleen, we have already touched upon here and there this gendered nature of remote work, more women starting to work remotely during the pandemic, more women being in teleworkable jobs, etc. I know that EIGE has looked at this in more detail, but I want to start with a relatively general question to you. Did the pandemic impact men and women in the same way, or did they experience rather different challenges, including with regard to working from home?
Yeah, thank you, Barbara, and good afternoon. It's nice to see you again. I must say I quite like the discussion so far, because as an employer, I recognize many of the things that have been said, both the positive ones and also the challenging ones. But let's indeed move to gender equality. And what I would like to start with is that an important fact is pre-COVID, EIGE estimated that it would take another 60 years for the European Union to achieve gender equality. That meant another 3 generations before women had equality with men. And of course, it's clear, and it's also what we see from data, that there's a huge impact of the COVID-19 crisis on gender equality. And it's important to make this clear that even pre-COVID, the situation wasn't really rosy. But what the pandemic has really meant for millions of people is that, let's say, their lives at work and their lives at home were literally merged into one. And telework in many cases led to long hours, the blurring of boundaries between home and the workplace. And this, by the way, was of course true for both women and men. But what we know from our research is that the big burden, of course, was on the shoulders of women. It's interesting that you just mentioned this right to disconnect, because there's one activity or type of work, I would even mention it, where people cannot disconnect, and that's care. Be it childcare, unpaid care, care for other dependents, for your parents, for people with disabilities. And what we estimated at EIGE is that women during the COVID pandemic, they took up 36 hours per week for care duties. And if you translate this to what it means for the year, it's 2,000 hours per year. So women literally had a double burden, let's say, on their shoulders during the COVID pandemic. And a second element I would like to mention here is that, with all good intentions, of course, the governments locked up people in their houses to protect them from that virus. But we saw a high spike of domestic violence throughout the European Union. For example, in France, we saw a 32% jump in domestic violence reports in just over 1 week. And Lithuania, the country where my agency is based, observed 20% more domestic violence reports over the 3-week lockdown period compared to the same period in 2019. So these 2 elements are really important to mention. And as we recover from the pandemic, luckily, we have to make sure that women are not pushed back into the domestic sphere. And I think, yeah, that's what I would like to share here. Thank you.
Very important points, Carleen. But if this unequal sharing of the burden for unpaid work, care work, household work, etc., persists, could there be a danger that then also the uptake of remote work, of telework, is unequal, with women starting to work mostly from home in order to be able to cope better with this double burden, and men mostly working from the office? So we have a male-dominated office and a female-dominated home environment. What would that mean to gender equality at work?
Well, Barbara, this question is really spot on. What we have seen through our research is that currently a third of women aged between 15 and 64 are economically inactive, which means that they are neither in paid work nor looking for it. And this aggravated because of the pandemic. And this is compared to 22% of men. So it's literally women who are not working, who have no intention to work. In 2021, it was the first time in 17 years where the number of economically inactive women increased. And this is really the impact of the pandemic, because before COVID, this figure had been dropping year on year. And the last time we measured, 7 million women were unable to take up paid work because they were providing unpaid care at home. And to put it in perspective, because numbers, of course, they do not always maybe say something, but that's the entire populations of Denmark and Latvia combined. So we really have to be very careful that the pandemic doesn't have a long-lasting consequence on gender equality. But I think there's also ways to stop these worsening inequalities. And if I may mention a few, because let's also look at positive elements. We really must be careful not to allow telework to become dominated by mothers trying to care for children at the same time as doing their job, as you say, while fathers remain undisturbed in the office. So we see three important factors here. Employers should create the conditions where all staff take advantage of flexible working arrangements in a way that allows for work-life balance. Secondly, governments need to make access to affordable professional care service as a priority. These need to exist for children as well as for older people and those with disabilities. And thirdly, we all need to make the fundamental change that is needed in the home. We should give men the opportunity to care for their children right from day one. And it's so important that governments earmark healthy amounts of parental leave for all fathers. And employers should make the taking up this leave not only available, but also acceptable and encouraged. And that's maybe where I would like to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Carleen. Very clear recommendations. We will now move to a topic that we haven't looked at so far at all, and that's why we have asked André to join us. One of the most cited advantages of remote work is, of course, avoiding the commute to workplaces in the city centers. But what will our city centers look like if offices remain half empty because people are working from home, and cafes and restaurants and sandwich shops are going bust because people are brewing their own coffees and making their own lunches in their own kitchens while working from home? So are we facing a downward spiral for cities?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and the discussion is indeed very interesting because we can really see the positive and the negative impacts of remote working, and we as cities are of course in the front line of these different impacts. In Nantes, we are working closely with other cities in Europe. We are part of the Eurocities network, so I'm going to talk about what we are doing here in Nantes, but I'm also sharing more widely what cities are trying to do in order to find a way to encourage the positive impacts of remote work, but also to handle with the negative impacts and try to reduce them as much as possible. As you mentioned, indeed, a lot of cities, and here in Nantes also, before the COVID crisis, we tried to see how we can promote remote work because it was a way of reducing, of course, traffic jams and the impact on the environment by reducing transport, and also it was an expectation from a certain number of employees already before, of course, the COVID crisis. And we try to develop some good practices for companies trying to handle, for example, the effect that workers' representatives should be involved in defining rules at the level of the companies. And as we have a lot of small and medium-sized companies, also to try to see how we can maybe find some rules at the level of sectors or at the local level, at the level of cities, for example, to make sure that, for example, the specific situation of women are taken into account as well. Of course, the COVID crisis has increased all this pressure, and we had, for example, here in Nantes, between 30 and 40% of all our workers that were working from home in a very short time frame, and we had to support them because not all of them had the equipment. We were mentioning the fact that some people don't have offices, of course, to work from home, but even sometimes the Wi-Fi connection was not so perfect in certain homes, of course, or they didn't have enough computers for the whole family, for example. So we did a lot of work to support them. And of course, we were thinking about, as you mentioned, how we can handle the impact of our cities. Actually, today we have 15% of the companies in Nantes that say that they are going to reduce their office space. Which on the one hand can be something positive because then we can have more space for apartments, for example, because in a lot of cities we are suffering from not having enough space for the people to live and have affordable housing, of course. But it needs to rethink the way how we can organize our cities and maybe to develop cities where you can have very closely together housing, working, and shopping and leisure activities to reduce transport, of course. So it's a whole way of transforming our cities to take into account also these different elements at the same time. And of course, we need to do it with all the different stakeholders. So what we try to do here in Nantes, but again, also in other Eurocities members, we have the same ideas. We try to organize a dialogue with the different stakeholders and to see how we can actually manage this transformation and find new solutions. And maybe I want to give one example that we have launched here in Nantes with some companies, in particular SMEs. They try to organize a network where the employees can work in offices from different companies. So actually the idea was to say, many companies have parts of their workers that are working from home or that don't want to come to their offices every day. So they can use this office space for workers from other companies that are living close to it. And this, I think, is quite an interesting way to create maybe a balance for the social link that you have been mentioning in the beginning. It's not your own colleagues, but it's still other people. And for the company, it's also a way to create maybe innovations, maybe some cooperations between these companies, or you can identify some good practices from other companies. And when you go to your company again, then you can bring these ideas as well. It's not so easy to manage because there are a lot of insurance problems, of course, also safety for IT and so on. But we managed to have currently 12 companies that take part in this project. And I think it's something that can be shared with other cities. And yeah, we are open to see what this might bring.
A Very interesting point, André, because I think this idea of a third workspace, the co-working space, is gaining traction everywhere. And to have this solution of not starting them from scratch, but existing companies opening up their offices to be shared with other companies, that's really a very, very interesting approach. Quick question to you. Is then the loss of the city centers the gain of rural areas? Is it the hour of the rural environment?
Yeah, what we can see, of course, that many people also took advantage of the possibility to do remote work, to find housing more far away from city centers, and of course then to have maybe a garden which they could not afford in the city center, of course. So it's something that we really observe in all our cities in Europe. And for us in Nantes, we take it as an advantage to better work maybe with the rural areas around us. So we try to really rethink our economic development by thinking not only about our city, but also the broader area around. And sometimes if we have some companies that we would like to attract to Nantes, we say them, don't try to find a place in the city center, but go a little bit more outside the city center. And even if it means that we won't get the taxes from this company, but we think that it's interesting because it will also offer this company maybe to have more space, and for the employees also to be able not to live in the city center and still be close to the companies. So it's a challenge again, but it's also an opportunity, I think, to create new alliances between big cities and metropolitan areas and the rural areas around us. And I think it's also one of the challenges, because we cannot continue in a way where we concentrate all the wellness and the economic dynamism in city centers, and then to have the rural areas that feel apart, because there are still people living in these areas as well, and we don't want them to commute day by day to the city centers for the work. They can, of course, come for leisure activities and cultural activities, maybe also for universities and so on. But for working, I think it's interesting also to share opportunities all over the territories.
Thank you so much, André, for bringing in this angle, the future of cities and rural areas, in light of a move towards more hybrid work arrangements. Anna, Camilla had to leave us, but I'm sure you have lots of comments on what we've just heard. I just want to briefly mention these 3 points: the need for negotiated solutions to shape the hybrid workplace of tomorrow. That was Albert's point. The gendered nature, or the danger of hybrid work having a gendered nature, the point made by Carleen, and then now the need to reinventing cities to some degree, the point that André made. Any comments from your side on these points?
First of all, big thanks to the experts here. I learned a lot, and I think it really demonstrates that there's so many facets of the whole thing we need to rethink. It's just not just about, let's just let people work from home. As I'm chairwoman for our Women at Microsoft Network, so what Carleen said, that was a really good point there. If you're looking at women's networks and gender equality activities, very often there's loads of women in a room saying we need more women in the workplace, and that's not where the action is that we need to take, is with the men. I come from Sweden originally, and we have a very good balance in Sweden when it comes to childcare. And also taking paternity leave. And I know, and I've heard more than once in Germany, there's still companies saying, yeah, sure, you can take paternity leave to the men, but you really, there's a feeling transferred that it's not okay, and it might even have, a career impact. It needs to be the most natural thing in the world. And then to Albert, I mean, I'm a Works Council fan, because I have seen the difference between companies with Works Council and without. And I don't think we could have ever done it without Works Council support, because there was a lot of things that we needed to figure out. You always have to stay compliant, and it's all about protecting the workforce, because we want them to stay with us for a long time, obviously, and we want them to stay healthy and not have a burnout, and things like the right to, to switch off. Some countries or some industries still don't have that as a, here's my top tip. Late calls, decline. It's okay. As in my company, it's, just say you decline. Or another thing, we record most meetings so that if you can't or don't want to participate when it's out of your hours, you can always listen to the next day. And many still don't do that. So finding that balance, and also just making this, it's a total thing of okay. So you don't need laws when your man said, hey, that's eating into my family time, so I can't participate. Can we find a time to, do this that is in my workday? And it's a bit sad that we still need laws, but I think we need to go there and make this very clear until time shows that we've gotten there. And the last point on the metropole and the place is that we talk about people, we talk about technology, but the place is also very important. So obviously all those shifts are also somewhat generational. Young people tend to want to work more where the bustling life is. Then once you then get children and you want to have your garden, you might want to live differently. So what I learned from you there, and I think is really interesting, is to think the end-to-end story there. We ourselves are seeing that we do not fill our offices all the time nowadays. So we are repurposing areas for what we need. We need more training rooms. We need more meeting rooms. When people come in, they come in not to sit at the desk, they come in to meet. So we are taking away desks and putting in more meeting areas, sofa areas. And I think one key thing that is going to be a big trend in the next, well, it is already now, is showroom. So you show your customers what it is that you're doing. And for example, in retail, now you're not going to have big clothes stores where you have all the sizes, these flagship stores. You're going to have few examples. You're going to go in and try, or even have your body scanned with your measurements, and then you're going to buy online, or you're going to place your order and have it sent to you within 24 hours. It means that those spaces are also being repurposed. So it's important to think that end to end, because we want the cities to bustle, but we also want rural areas to prosper, because there have been countries where rural areas are being depleted, so that no doctor wants to move there. So you have to drive 100 kilometers or more if you're having a baby, because there's nothing there. It's one of those things that we also need to make sure we balance out. So I think we all learned today, there's a lot to think about, and there's a lot of balance that needs to be sought, and we need to be open-minded.
Thank you for that, Anna. If you have watched the previous session, you know that we close these sessions with a round of takeaways. So I will ask all of you to very briefly share your most important insight or recommendation from this session. And the more precise and clearer you are, I think the more it will be appreciated by our audience and the many policy actors in that audience. Albert, should we start with you? Your takeaway from this session, recommendation to policy actors.
Okay, what I take away is that I see the same difficulties in different businesses, also in the local councils. So, but nevertheless, I know you don't need a law, okay, but we need a recommendation. So we have good companies, we have bad companies, and if we want to provide employees, we need a clear frame. And it's not enough that companies do anything on a voluntary basis. I know Microsoft is a huge company. So, and by the way, Solvay has worldwide 16 weeks paternity leave and 16 weeks maternity leave around the world. So everything is possible, but sometimes we need a clear regulation. This is my takeaway.
Thank you so much. Very clear, Albert. Carleen, will you go next?
Sure, Barbara. My recommendation would be that we need to ensure that telework brings benefits to both women and men. And both governments and workplaces have a responsibility to ensure that flexible work arrangements promote gender equality instead of entrenching existing inequalities.
Thanks for that. Also very clear, Carleen. André, please.
I would say that if there are discussions about a new regulation for telework and remote work, cities need to be around the table, because I have tried to show that there are a lot of impacts on cities. And I think that it's very important to integrate this wider approach, and of course rural areas as well. But cities and Eurocities, we are of course ready to take part in any kind of discussions to create a framework that can make it most beneficiary for all the different stakeholders and for men and women. I agree, of course.
Thank you so much, André. And Anna, for you, I have a special task for this last round, because you have been very optimistic about the impact of more flexible work arrangements. I'd now like you to take slightly the other perspective, and I would want you to reflect on the risks that you see, after all, even if you're optimistic overall, and what do we need to pay particular attention to in order to guarantee that we have a bright future of work?
Interesting, thank you. Yes, I am very positive, but of course there are risks. And one of the key things here that we talked about is there's one common factor across everything we spoke about, and that's people, to put people in the center. And the risk is, of course, that gets forgotten once we need to recover as markets have gone down lately, for example, because corporations and companies are only as good as the people that they have in the company. But the risk is that we're trying to overproportionally, win back the growth that we might have lost in the last few years, and that would just possibly be on the back of the people and the employees. Number two, the risk is you've heard this, talent. You need to win the right talent for your company, and we do not have enough talent out there. So companies are right now bustling to hire, young people from university and the people with the right skills. And skilling and learning needs to be a priority. And I think many still don't realize that you don't train someone on the job nowadays for a week in a classroom and then they do this job for 20 years. We have to learn all the time, and learning costs money. And that's a risk I see, that the investment is still not there to help people to put learning into place. And that's one of the things every company needs to focus upon, to give learning. Young people nowadays, when they're hiring with you, they're asking, what can I learn in your company? What certifications can I do? How can I further myself as a person and grow my career and grow my skills? So that's the second thing that needs to be invested in. And the last thing, as I do have to mention again what Carleen said on the risk on the gender equality, but just general equality. I love that you also kept mentioning people with disabilities. I hope that we can look into a future where there's a workplace for everyone and that we take everyone into consideration. That's inclusion. And I think this is going to become bigger and bigger, because we will need women, people with disabilities in our companies, not just for our own sake to have diversity in our workplace, but it mirrors our customer base, because everyone has all the people are people. So with that, not forgetting when it comes to equality and workers and the workforce, that there are a lot of groups out there that we need to make sure we bring on board. And that's something that I see is just starting, but we should be so much further now.
Thank you so much, Anna, for sharing these thoughts. Thanks again to all you as having joined Foundation Forum 2022 and this session on the future of work with your advice and insights. Thanks to Anna Kopp, Camilla Cavendish, Albert Kruft, Carleen Scheele, and André Sobczak. To our online audience, please stay tuned, stay with us for the keynote speech of Taoiseach Micheál Martin, the Irish Prime Minister. Thank you again.